accidentally burned down my neighbor's fence, and she tries to milk me for $10,000. Judge humbles that ass up real quick. This sub has gotten me through a lot of boredom and has provided me with hours of entertainment. I figure it's my turn to tell my revenge story. So it's been about 4 years since this happened. I was about 18 at the time, working for a security company. There were constant call-offs and no-shows, have no idea why. But being so young and naive, I was constantly working 16-hour shifts and not coming home until 8 a.m. Also, I lived with my father at the time. The time frame of this was around the 4th of July. I finally had a day off and my best friend was back in town for vacation. We decided to get together and chip in on some good old American fireworks. To be fair, I have had nothing but bad experiences with fireworks, so I had no idea how this would be any different. We got home with the fireworks and we laid them all out on the floor: sparklers, bottle rockets, cakes, and Roman candles. I say, why don't we mess around with some sparklers since it's still not dark yet? Great idea. We go into my backyard, where it hasn't rained in well over 2 months, and it is extremely dry. You see the problem here? One of the little sparkle from mine and my friend's sparkler made contact with the ground and made it 2 small fires that quickly spread to a large area. I ran as fast as I could to grab the garden hose and quickly started spraying down the fire. It was no use. It was spreading faster than I could spray it. I handed my friend the hose and called 911. What felt like hours was only 4 minutes, and the fire was spreading to the neighbor's fence. The neighbor came outside, and they were fairly calm to grab their hose and spray down the fence, along with the dead grass in her yard. The fire department shows up finally, and I tell my friend, "Only one of us needs to get in trouble. You should leave." He was reluctant to leave because he felt equally responsible, but I convinced him I didn't want him to get in trouble and have to drop out of college. My neighbor was super chill about the entire situation at first. I told her that we could talk about replacing the fence and get some quotes to repair it. She was just super grateful that everyone was okay. About 2 hours after the fire, the arson/fire investigator came to question me about the fire. I told him the truth. I said I was in the backyard by myself playing with fireworks and accidentally lit the ground on fire. I had gotten off that day without being hit by any charges and was commended for being honest. Here is where it goes downhill very fast. About a week later, I get a knock on the door from the neighbor. I opened the door and she handed me 2 pieces of paper for me to look at. There was a quote for the fence valued at around $4,000 and an estimate for lawn care valued around $6,000. These were really shady and just typed out on a Microsoft Word document, no logo or company name. She then adds, "I will also be having you pay my water bill for 3 months because the new yard will need lots of water." Now the fence this woman had before was ragged and falling apart. Her yard? Dead grass, weeds everywhere, never mowed it. Now looking at this paper, she wants a mahogany fence and a brand new backyard with flowers and trimmed hedges? I said, "I need to get an estimate myself. This doesn't feel right." She says, "Remember you agreed to replace my fence, and a real man keeps promises." I shut the door and called my dad to tell him about what just happened. He flipped the fuck out and told me, "Son, don't you give that slut a single dime." He gives me the number to his handyman and tells me to take care of it. The next day I had the guy come out for an estimate, and the neighbor ran outside flailing her arms. "I did not give you permission to get an estimate on my fence. Technically, it separates the property line, so it's both of our fences." She calls the cops on me for having a contractor, and they ultimately can't do a single thing because I'm on my property. He quickly finishes the estimate off at $1,200. I also knew a guy who did lawn care from my time working at the grocery store. He estimated the lawn reseeding while she was away from the house to be about $800. After I get these estimates, I give copies to the woman, and she is having none of it. I don't know these people. I don't want them near my house. They're probably really shitty contractors. I said, "No, I know them personally. They are really nice people and do great work." She shut the door in my face, and I went on my way. I ended up working a 16-hour shift that night and got home at 8 a.m., and this woman comes knocking on my door at 9 a.m. and demanded I speak to her. I explained, "I would really love to do this, but I just got home and I have to be back at work in less than 5 hours. I need to sleep. She goes, what kind of lazy asshat sleeps in until 2 p.m.? At this point, I had about lost it and told her you can either accept my $2,000 for my quotes or kiss my ass and get nothing. She stood there for a while with her mouth gaped open, but she accepted my offer and planned to meet down at the notary the next morning. I spent that night after I got off work, writing a contract and gathering the $2,000 in cash. The next morning I wake up and grab this contract to meet down at the notary. I was thrilled to finally be done with this broad and never speak to her again. I waited for her for over 3 hours and she didn't show up. I get a call from her saying, I'm sorry, the $2,000 isn't enough. I'm having my guys start work on this project and you'll be paying me full price. Oh, really? After that, I did not say a single word to her, and I watched for a few months as these guys turned her backyard into an oasis, complete with a small pond, brand new sod and flowers, the whole 9 yards. Come to find out, she had plans to remodel these things for a long time and was just waiting for the opportunity to go through with it. Also in this time, she used her remodel funds to go on a trip to Hawaii. You know how I found out about this? She was bragging about it on the neighborhood Facebook group and didn't know I was in it. I have a different Facebook name than my real name. Are you ready for the revenge? Now, 4 months after the fire and all the remodels, I get served papers to go to court for $10,300. At 18 years old, I'm having to hire a lawyer to work my case. When we finally do get into court, I lay everything out. The quotes, being harassed multiple times, not showing up after agreeing to a deal, not wanting me to get my own quotes, required by law by the way, and her bragging about screwing me out of money, and I have proof of all of this. The judge looked at her and said, Ma'am, with all due respect, you're out of your daggum mind. Not only did this young man tell the truth of what happened, he offered to pay you more than he was supposed to. Your lawn was already dead before the fire occurred, therefore he is only responsible for the fence of $1,200. I will also deduct from this his lawyer fees, $800. So, I burned this woman's fence down, and all I'm having to give her is $400?
Cool.
She took a huge financial loss from this. Not sure how much the Hawaii trip cost her, but she was in serious debt. She ended up having to sell the house because of it and moved into a smaller house. Haven't heard anything from her since. TLDR. Burn my neighbor's fence down, sees it as an opportunity to milk an 18-year-old to remodel her backyard and go on a trip to Hawaii. Takes me to court and walks out $9,600 plus in debt. Edit. Some grammar issues. Also, holy hell, I normally dislike people who put in edits like this, but holy hell, it's crazy how this post blew up. I also wanted to clear a few things up. I am not saying that I do not feel bad for burning down my neighbor's fence. I felt really bad about it and wish we could have handled it more civilly. I would have been happy to meet in the middle or get multiple quotes. To this day, I still do not use fireworks because we could have really hurt someone. What I have learned through this, though, is it's best to take responsibility for your actions from the gate. The fire investigator had seen the leftover fireworks near the area of the fire and said he would have slapped cuffs on me and I would be in jail for arson if I would have gave him any other answer. I was not criminally charged and the incident was deemed an accidental fire. Thank you to the people in the comments giving me information about how much a fence actually costs. I've never had to purchase a fence before, so I had just believed what the contractor had told me without second thought. I will take some time after the edit to address some individual questions. To celebrate how successful this post is done, I have donated $150, $25 for each medal, to the Red Cross Home Fire Relief Fund. And here is the second story. Boyfriend of 5 years cheated on me, so I ruined his precious RuneScape account. TLDR at the bottom. My boyfriend and I had met online well over 6 years ago through an online game by the name of RuneScape. He was 14, and I was 17, but it had felt like we had been friends forever. We both played the game very often and connected through it, eventually leading us to start a long-distance relationship. Things began to escalate as the years went on, and we began seeing each other in person every few months or so. We were about 1,500 miles apart, so one of our main priorities for the future was moving in together and closing the distance. My job had prevented us from doing that, but we had finally set a date for me to move in with him in December of this year. Our relationship never had any serious issues, and I was more than happy to have him in my life, as he was happy to have me. As I got older, I began to play RuneScape less and less, as work took up most of my time. He continued to play regularly, if not more than he had when I first met him. He could never really hold down a job and barely had an income, but I supported him throughout the years, and even paid his rent from across the country after he moved out of his parents' house a few years ago. I never really minded it because he was a sweetheart, but we began to have problems. In November of last year, I couldn't help pay his monthly rent. I was short on cash after having to pay my own living expenses alongside car repairs and bills I owed to the state, and I just couldn't afford to support him at the time. When I called him one night to discuss it, he freaked out and started crying that he didn't want to live with his parents again. I tried calming him down and even suggesting that I could help him find a temporary job until I could start providing for him again, but he wasn't having it. He claimed his parents would abuse him if he returned home, which I know for a fact isn't true because him and his parents have stayed with me several times. They've given him the world. I eventually did calm him down, but he remained passive-aggressive the entire night, and we eventually hung up. Because I cared about him, I reached out to his father the next day and informed him that he would probably be moving back home after his lease expired that month. I explained how I wouldn't be able to afford paying for his living for a month or two, and if there were any local jobs he could work in order to, make an income. Apparently, a friend of his father needed help managing a small warehouse for his business and was looking to potentially hire my boyfriend for the season. It paid $15 per hour and was super easy, lifting boxes, sweeping the floors, and taking inventory. I brought it up to my boyfriend that same night, and he was not having it. Not only did he not want to work in a shitty warehouse, but he didn't want to work at all. All he planned to do day in, day out was play RuneScape. I brought up a few other job listings I had found in his area, and he immediately shot all of them down as well. He then had the audacity to comment about how he thinks I should work harder and possibly work a second job. I kept my composure and simply argued against it until we eventually hung up. I collapsed on my bed and cried for a good hour or two afterwards because of the intense emotional stress I was under. Not only do I work 8 hours a day, 6 days a week, I'm also an industrial meteorologist. If I remember correctly, that's a lot more work than playing RuneScape every day and using my Hulu account. I really considered breaking up with him right that moment, but I changed my mind and decided to give him another chance. Looking back on it, big mistake. I messaged him throughout the night, and we sort of made up, but I was still a little uneasy about the entire event. He had moved back with his parents by the time December had come, and I began to help him look for jobs while he wasted his life away playing video games. I eventually persuaded him to start working at a small retail store near his house, and he thankfully began to make some money. I would still buy him video games and transfer him money like normal because I spoiled him, and our relationship began to feel somewhat okay again. Last month, both him and I put our money together to fly him across the US to stay with me for 4 days. We hadn't seen each other in person since last summer, so we were both looking forward to it. He arrived and we had a great time for the first few days because he could actually take me on dates for once with his new income. Everything was perfect until I caught a glimpse of his phone's lock screen while he was taking a shower. "When are you gonna leave, Hare?" the Discord message read. I could have ran into the bathroom and snapped his neck in that moment, but I kept myself together as best as I could without killing him. I had never felt so used, disrespected, or hated in my entire life. When he came out of the bathroom, I gave him a fake smile, but I genuinely hated him from that moment on. He could have dropped dead on the floor, and I would have spit on him. I spent the remainder of the night watching him play RuneScape, and I remained very quiet. He took notice of this and asked me if everything was okay, and I lied and told him I was fine. When it came time to go to sleep, I let that fucker climb into bed with me, and he tried initiating sex because it was our final night together. I rejected as politely as I could without tearing his member completely off. He was disappointed, but went out like a light. Immediately after he went to sleep, I reached over and unplugged his phone and started digging through his messages with that girl. I feared that I had misinterpreted the message I had seen, but I was completely right after all. Not only had he been cheating on me, he had been doing so for nearly 6 months, leading me to believe that he hooked up with another girl directly after I couldn't pay for his living in November. I scrolled through probably 100,000 messages and wanted to vomit my insides out by the end of it. He had talked shit about me, claimed I was emotionally abusive just as he had done with his parents, and even sent this girl my nudes so they could pick me apart physically. When morning came, I had slept in because of how late I was up reading his messages. I woke up to find him on my computer playing RuneScape and eating my food. It was like all of our relationship had been wiped from my mind, and he was now an evil stranger sitting in my house. I wanted to scream at him. I wanted to tear him apart and kick him out of my house onto the street, but I didn't. In fact, I gave him as much love and attention as I could muster that morning because I wanted to leave things feeling normal between us. I dropped him off at the airport, and we had a quick and somber goodbye before I left him forever, unbeknownst to him. I drove back home as calmly as I could before crying my eyes out in a mix of complete anger and emotional pain. I ended up kicking my bed frame so hard that they would split, and I had to buy another one recently. If only it were his face. I wanted to break his heart by the time he arrived back home, but I wanted it to really hurt. I logged into our joint RuneScape account that we had made several years ago, where him and I would work on training the same account and raising it almost like our baby. We had always joked that if we were to ever split up, he would take half of the account's bank contents and I would take the rest. I took my half and transferred it to my main account before taking his half and giving it away to random people throughout the game. Every last bit of it. Even items I couldn't normally trade away, I used a spell to convert the items into coins, which I then gave away as well. The bank was now empty. It then occurred to me that I had the credentials to his main account were written down in my desk, as he would frequently have me train his farming skill every so often. I didn't hesitate at all and logged into his precious 14-year-old RuneScape account. I immediately took all of the contents of his bank and sold it all on the Grand Exchange, a marketplace in the game. It took an extremely long time to clear out his bank, but he would still be flying home for about another 4 hours, so I had plenty of time. By the time I had sold/destroyed everything, I had 4 stacks of coins totaling over 8.5 billion. Now what to spend it on? I wanted to waste his life earnings on the most useless, stupid thing I could think of besides him. I logged back into my main account to reach out to a friend of mine that collects massive stacks of burnt food. For the unaware, burnt food in RuneScape has no use. You can't unburn them, eat them, or even sell them on the Grand Exchange. They are, however, tradable amongst players. I've always poked fun at this guy for collecting burnt food, but I was now more thankful than ever to make his acquaintance in my revenge. I asked him what the most obscure, unwanted item was of the burnt food variety was, and he replied burnt spider. Lo and behold, he had roughly 6,000 of the items spider on shaft burnt in his bank that he was willing to sell me. Feeling generous with my ex-boyfriend's coins, I gave my friend a full stack of 2.147 billion coins and left a very happy customer. I dropped the 6,083 burnt spiders in his bank, but still had about 6 billion coins left to spend. With the remaining money, I decided to treat myself. I went on to the Grand Exchange and ended up going on a shopping spree. The first thing I bought were 100 bonds. If you're not familiar, a bond in RuneScape grants you 14 days of in-game membership. After trading all 100 bonds to my account, I now have almost 4 years of membership paid for me. I spent a majority of his coins on extremely nice armor and weapons, all of which went straight into my account. He still had about an extra billion, so I spent it on the supplies I needed to level up an expensive skill of mine. By the end of the afternoon, he was left with a measly 150,000 coins in his bank, all of which I gave away to a guy cooking pizzas outside of the exchange. Nothing was left, so I decided to pick up a pile of bones off the ground and leave it solely in his bank. It might sound petty, but I laughed for a while. Now, I know what you're thinking. This is so cruel. You ruined the tens of thousands of hours he had put into a game. Well, it was time he learned that I can be a bitch, a mean bitch. On top of spending every last coin he had ever made, I leveled his defense skill. This may not sound bad. In fact, it sounds like a good thing. I helped his account progress, right? Well, no. Unfortunately for my ex, he had what players commonly refer to as a pure account, meaning he never ever dared to level his defense skill from level 1. in order to keep the lowest defense stats, but have high offensive stats. Well, not anymore. Have fun with your permanent level 6 defense. Cycling through hundreds of possible forms of revenge in my head, I settled on getting rid of his house. It's quite an achievement in RuneScape to have a nice house of your own. In fact, he had one of the nicest I had ever seen in the game. In order to have built it, he must have spent well over a few billion coins. Too bad I had disassembled it all in a matter of minutes, deleting it all into cyberspace. And there's no insurance either. He's going to have to rebuy everything with his non-existent money if he wants a new house.
Bye bye, casa de chite.
Scrolling through his friends list, I decided to act as him and pay a visit to his friends who were currently online and admit that I had cheated on my girlfriend and was fully proud of it. If his friends hadn't removed him by that point, I removed them. All of them. Lastly, to add a beautiful little cherry to this revenge-filled cake, I changed his username. You're able to change your username once a month on RuneScape, so I changed his to let everybody know that he's a dirty cheater. I obviously won't drop his username here, but I did the best I could to embarrass him with a 12-character limit. He should be able to reclaim his previous username in about 3 weeks, but if he waits too long, I'll be able to swipe it and slap it on a throwaway account of my own forever. He sent me a very hateful and aggressive message later that night, followed by pictures of him crying. I wrote him a sincere message officially ending the relationship, while also scaring him away by threatening to take him to court, oversharing my nudes, and possibly filing a cease and desist if he were to contact me anytime soon. I don't plan on doing any of that. I just don't want to speak to him ever again. TLDR, boyfriend of 5 years that I had financially supported for everything decided to cheat on me and spread my nudes. I wasted his RuneScape riches on 6,000 dead spiders and completely trashed his 14+ years of effort, leaving him with nothing to show for but a shameful username. Edit. Wow, I really didn't expect this to blow up as much as it did, lol. To clarify, this post is referring to old school RuneScape rather than RuneScape 3. We met playing RS3, but immediately put all of our focus into old school when it first released. He even transferred 90% of his RS3 worth over to old school through bots and such, making this revenge even sweeter. So while his old school account is only 6 years old, as is mine, his fortunes were the collective effort of a previous 8 years on RS3. Thank you so much for the Reddit gold. I don't know what to do with it, but I'm glad I've given you a revenge boner. And here's the next story.
Coworker tried to get me fired over breast implants, so I pulled a reverse Uno card. TLDR. Coworker harassed me over having implants, which I only got because I had cancerous cells. I called her out. She reported me to HR for calling her out. I got a bunch of people to write statements of all the times she harassed me, and she got fired instead. Also, I've been told that isn't what a reverse Uno is, but I can't change it. Edit. Just want to add that regardless of my reasons for getting implants, I still should not have been harassed over them. It just happened to be relevant here because it made Jill look like a real dick, which is probably why she reported me. 4 years ago now, when I was 24, my mom died of breast cancer, and as both my grandmothers had also died of it, I saw a specialist for a screening. I found out I had some cells in one of my breasts that could have turned cancerous at any given moment. I was told I had a few options. I could have regular screenings every 3 or 4 months until it does develop into cancer. I was told the risk of the cells becoming cancerous was very high due to family history, but it could also potentially never could turn. So I'd just be getting these screenings for no reason. I could get a single mastectomy on the breast with the bad cells, but they'd need to keep an eye on the other one. So I'd still need regular checkups for the other breast. I could get a bilateral mastectomy and remove all of my breast tissue, basically eliminating the risk. I went for the bilateral mastectomy. It was admittedly the most drastic option, but after seeing what cancer did to my mom and grandmothers, I didn't want to risk it. I was warned about scarring, but told it should be fairly minor. It wasn't, and I was left with 2 huge, pink, jagged scars on either side of my chest, each about 1 inch long and half an inch wide. And it caused me to go into a severe depression, where it got to the stage of me not even leaving my flat because I didn't want people to see me, throwing out my mirrors and getting physically sick looking at myself. I went to a therapist who suggested a plastic surgeon. The therapist said they'd never normally do that, but it was clearly something I was struggling with, and I might never get over it, and the therapist could see why I struggle with it. Although I'll admit the therapist did send me to ask about scar reduction, the plastic surgeon suggested a cream, a laser, or implants. The cream didn't work, and the laser was both expensive and risky, so I went with the implants. My natural boobs were an F cup, so I went with a slightly smaller DD. Since then, my mental health has improved, and I feel a lot better about the way I look. My confidence has gone up, as has my self-esteem. I know I shouldn't put so much into my appearance, but I wasn't exaggerating about these scars. Huge, bright pink, jagged, raised, just really awful to look at, and I hated seeing myself, and they are now nicely hidden away and you can barely feel them. In the present day, I'm 28 years old and working in an office. I'm doing a lot better than I was. My coworker Jill found out I'd had a boob job, but not about the cancer thing. When myself and my friend from years before the mastectomy were planning a holiday and she made a joke about me going on a plane with my implants, and Jill overheard. By the end of the day, the entire office knew I'd had a boob job, but not why, and half a dozen people confirmed Jill had told them. Over the next few months, Jill made many jokes and comments about my chest to coworkers when I was in earshot, at one point saying I had more plastic than Barbie and calling me fake in two ways. I didn't hear this one myself, but a friend in the office told me that Jill had at one point referred to me as a sack of silicone. IDK what her problem was exactly, but at one point she mentioned the NHS, so I assumed Jill thought that I'd got my tits done for free on taxpayer money. I'd gotten the mastectomy on NHS but gone private for therapy and implants. I asked her to stop more than once, but unfortunately the places I'd talked to her were places like the lift and the women's bathroom, where there weren't any cameras, and Jill just kept making comments no matter how often I asked her not to. I wouldn't say it was every single day, but I heard at least 3 comments per week for 3 months. I hit my breaking point when me, Jill, and a few other coworkers were having lunch. I referred to something as being shallow, and Jill said, "You know all about being shallow," while gesturing to my chest. I snapped. I said, "Do you know why I have these? A few years ago, the doctors found potentially cancerous cells in my breast tissue. I was advised to get a mastectomy and was left with huge, ugly scars on my chest. I went to see a therapist who sent me to a cosmetic surgeon who advised me to get implants to hide the scars, and I did just so I could look at myself in the mirror without crying. So maybe next time you want to judge someone for having cosmetic surgery, you should ask them why they had it first." And feeling like that was a mic drop moment, I picked up my food and left. For the rest of the day, I had about 1/3 of my office come up to me and offer support, and the rest tell me that Jill was just joking around and I was being a bitch. I replied that Jill was being a bitch long before I was. I then got an email from HR saying they wanted to talk to me the following day, and when I called for clarification, they mentioned a hostile work environment. Note, this is apparently an American term and holds little weight in England, but it's what was said over the phone. I knew the person who signed off the email and I'd spoken to. Her name was Debbie, and she was Jill's friend in HR, so I was fairly confident on who had reported me. I realized that if this was already being sent to HR, I needed as much ammunition as possible, so I went about collecting my information. As Debbie had dealt with me so far, it was safe to assume she would be the person reviewing the complaint with me, and if that was true, I was fucked. However, I vaguely remembered a section on complaints that was in my contract when I first signed with the company. I flicked through the contract, and there was a part in complaints section that said I was contractually allowed to request a change of reviewer if I felt my allocated reviewer was biased. It was called an impartial overseer. I photocopied the page and highlighted that part. Then I messaged the people who had offered their support over Facebook and said basically, HR have asked to see me. Do any of you remember Jill insulting me to your face? And are you willing to write and sign something saying what you heard and when? Not everyone was willing to help, as Jill is somewhat feared in the office due to her befriending HR and management, but about 20 people were willing to help me. I guessed roughly when I'd asked Jill to stop previously. The 4 asks over the last few months, some timings were easy to guess as they'd happened on my break or when I'd first arrived at work. And I wrote them all down, along with a rough time of when the lunchroom confrontation happened, and a list of names of who was there for the lunchroom confrontation. I got to work slightly early the next morning. I went round everyone who had messaged me, and most of them managed to give me a printed and signed letter. Some didn't manage to write one, but NBD. This isn't exact words as there's 16 letters to sum up here, but the gist was, my name is their name. I work with Jill last name and OP. On date at time, approx. I spoke with Jill last name, during which she referred to OP as quoted insult. I felt this was inappropriate as it directly related to OP's appearance, and am willing to go on record further to establish that Jill last name has been discussing OP in the workplace in the same manner for 3 months now, causing me discomfort in creating what I feel is a hostile work environment. Signed their name, I wound up with about 16 letters, all from different people, and one of them was in the lunchroom for my conversation with Jill. Some even had bullet-pointed lists of everything Jill had said to them about me or other people. As it turns out, Jill has issues with a lot of people's appearances. She apparently made comments about one coworker's weight and something anti-Semitic about a different coworker's nose, all of which were put in these letters. There are about 45 people in the office, so while 16 wasn't a majority, it's still a decent amount. The letters weren't hugely long, most were only a paragraph, but they had all the necessary information. I was asked to come to HR at 10 a.m. I took the letters from coworkers, the photocopy of the page in my contract, and my dates and times in a little folder with me. I got there and Debbie was the one overseeing the interview. She got up from her desk, ready to lead me into another room. I immediately turned to the other HR worker that was currently there and said, "So is my meeting with you then?" Debbie said, "No, you're with me." I replied that this wouldn't sit well with me, as my contract states I have a right to an impartial overseer. And as I said this, I took the contract page out of my folder. Debbie read it. I wouldn't let her take the paper when there was a shredder so close by, and said she could be impartial. I replied that I really didn't mean to be a pain, but I had it on good authority that the person on the other end of this complaint is her friend, and my contract does say I'm allowed an impartial overseer. Debbie stomped off to get supervisor. Supervisor asks how I know she can't be impartial, and I tell him that I have it on good authority that the Jill, who was on the other end of this complaint, is a close friend of Debbie. He asked Debbie if this was true, to which she only replied, "I can be impartial." Supervisor too. Supervisor took a deep breath, asked the other HR rep to come with him, and the four of us all went to review the complaint. I thanked them for being so accommodating. I was worried I'd annoyed them. Debbie took out the complaint, and all three of them went through it with me. Debbie looked homicidal the whole time the interview was happening, as she had clearly anticipated firing me, or at least recommending me being fired. The interview went something like this. It took like over half an hour, and they kept asking me the same questions, but phrased different ways, so this is a really drastically condensed version. Q. You said outside that you think Jill last name reported you. Why is this? A. Jill has had an issue with me for about 3 months now. Why didn't you come to us when you realized Jill had an issue? A. I had no issue with her. Q. What issue does Jill have with you? A. 4 years ago, a specialist identified potentially cancerous cells in my breast tissue. I had surgery to remove my breast tissue, thereby removing the cells and the risk. After the surgery, I was left with large scars on my chest. I went to a therapist for low self-esteem and depression. The therapist suggested a plastic surgeon who suggested breast implants to cover my scars. All of this is in my medical history, which you have a copy of in my file and my full permission to review. Jill found out about my breast implants but didn't know about the cancer. Jill had a problem with my breast implants and decided to communicate this problem to our coworkers. Q. Why do you feel this is true? A. Here's 16 signed statements, all from different coworkers, all testifying that Jill told the entire office I'd had breast implants on the day she found out, and has since made comments about these implants frequently. They have quotes of what Jill said to them about it and rough dates and times. Q. Rough dates and times? A. No one knew this would be escalated to such an extent, so no one really took notes as and when it happened. Q. What event or events do you think directly led to this complaint of harassment? A. For me, harassment began when Jill told everyone about my breast implants without my consent. But as to the complaint placed against me, it would probably be what happened at about time yesterday in the lunchroom. Jill made a comment about me being shallow while gesturing to my breasts, and I replied by giving her an abridged version of my relevant medical history and ending with a comment about the importance of getting the full story. There are cameras in the lunchroom, so I'm sure you'll be able to find that conversation. I'll admit I could have handled the situation better, but after 3 months, I felt I had to put my foot down. Here's a list of names of people who were also present. There were 6 people at the table, including myself and Jill. One of these people is also in those letters and has written their account of the conversation and signed it. Q. Had you had a conversation with Jill prior to this regarding her comments about you? A. Several spaced out over the last 3 months. Each time I communicated to her that I felt uncomfortable and upset with these comments she was making and would appreciate it if she were to stop. Q. To your knowledge, was Jill made aware of your former cancer at any point in this time? A. Number. It wasn't mentioned in the conversation with my friend she overheard, and I didn't tell her because frankly it's none of her business, and I did not feel the need to detail my medical history to a coworker in order to avoid further sexual harassment. Supervisor stands up and says, "Well, I think we're done here." He shakes my hand and sends me back to my desk, saying that I'd hear from them after they reviewed the evidence. Letters, CCTV, medical history, and anything they had already, and made a decision on the case. I got back to my desk, pulled up my CV, and prepared to start the job search again. About an hour goes by, then the person who wrote the letter and was there for the lunchroom conversation gets called for a meeting with HR. They come back 10-ish minutes later. The other people who were also there for the lunchroom conversation get called one by one, except Jill. All of them are gone for about 10 minutes, then come back, find a coworker, and say that HR wants to see them. Then the people who wrote letters but weren't there yesterday are also called one by one and are each gone for about 10 minutes each, some longer, some shorter. By about 3:30, it looks like everyone who wrote a letter or was there in the lunchroom has been interviewed. Then finally Jill gets called in. She's gone for about 30 minutes and comes back fuming. She glares at me while I work, but I ignore her. 4:30-ish, Jill gets called into HR again. 5 p.m. rolls around, everyone is either leaving or getting ready to leave, when Jill storms back into the office. She glares at me the whole time she packs up her desk. She then starts telling anyone who will listen that I got her fired before shoving her way onto the lift. An email comes in from HR. My case is closed.
Let us know if you think they were in the wrong. My grandmother put greedy preachers in their places. Twice. Even after she died. TL/DR, my grandmother generously served her Bible-believing Christian church for almost 50 years, without asking anything in return. But when she became elderly, disabled, and homebound, her church acted like she did not exist until she was in hospice care and literally on her deathbed, when that church showed a sudden interest in telling Grandma to remember your church in your will. She waited until exactly the right moment, in front of exactly the right audience, to expose these greedy assholes for what they were. Twice. My grandmother was a member of a large conservative, Bible-believing church for her entire adult life. This church, which I'll call Big White Church, was a member of a large evangelical denomination. Big White Church was located in a prosperous suburb of a large city in the Bible Belt of the Deep South of the USA. Grandma was very active in Big White Church. She worked in the nursery every Sunday morning, helped cook hundreds of church fellowship breakfasts and dinners, accompanied her children and grandchildren on dozens of church retreats and choir tours, taught youth Bible study on Sunday nights, and was very active in supporting home missions, as well as helping with other youth programs. She always tithed and often gave extra for missions and special offerings. Grandma's greatest talent was making other people feel important. I've seen this firsthand many times. Although I belonged to a different church, I often visited with Grandma, and when I did, I usually went to Big White Church functions with her. I've seen her single-handedly cook breakfast for dozens of Big White Church youth, a task which took over 2 hours, even in the church's large kitchen. Then, after the meal, she asked the group for a round of applause for the high school student leader for doing such a great job of organizing the prayer breakfast. I remember that on a big white church youth retreat at a rural church camp, she drove most of the night to go back to the city and retrieve a big box of evangelistic materials that one of the assistant pastors, whom I'll call Ass Pastor, had forgotten and asked her to get in time for a morning program the next day. His boss, the senior pastor, I'll call him Pompous Pastor, never found out that Ass Pastor had screwed up or that Grandma had fixed it for him. Ass Pastor never even thanked Grandma. Even though I was a child, this bothered me so much that I asked her about it. She said that she didn't mind at all. She told me her reward would be that those materials would help children find Jesus. Grandma's service to her church ended abruptly at the age of 73 when she broke her back in a car accident. Afterwards, for the last 10 years of her life, she was homebound and could not go to church because of this injury and declining health due to old age. Her mind was just as sharp as ever, and her faith remained sincere, but her body wore out a little more every day. During those 10 years, she made many efforts to reach out to her church, its leadership, and her church friends, inviting them to visit her at her home, etc., without success. Every one of these invitations was declined or simply ignored. Near the end, when she was in home hospice care, she decided to plan her own funeral. She and my grandpa called her church and asked for the senior pastor, Pompous Pastor, whom she had known for over 30 years, to visit her so that they could plan her memorial service, which she and Grandpa wanted to be held at the church. Pompous Pastor was too busy, but Ass Pastor stopped by a few days later. According to my grandpa, here's what happened at that meeting with my grandma literally on her deathbed. Grandma, Grandpa, and Ass Pastor discussed her funeral for a couple of minutes. Then Ass Pastor started pressuring her to lay up your treasure in heaven by remembering your church in your will. Grandpa told him firmly that this is neither the time nor the place to discuss her will. They went back to discussing the funeral for a few minutes. Then Ass Pastor steered the conversation back to Grandma's will, with liberal injections of how badly her church needed her support. Grandpa told him several times that it was inappropriate to talk to Grandma about her will or the church's financial needs, because she was terminally ill and in an enormous amount of physical pain. Ass Pastor would agree and briefly talk about the funeral, but would then go back to talking about the church's financial needs, heavenly rewards, where your treasure is your heart will be also, Matthew 6 verse 21, Luke 12 verse 34, etc. My grandma started crying. To put this into context, Grandma was more than a steel magnolia. She was titanium coated with diamond wrapped in Kevlar. She rarely ever cried and never ever cried about herself. Not one tear when the doctor told her that her back was broken so badly that she would never walk again, nor during the following 6 months in futile rehab. She would shed sincere but well-managed tears at funerals and while visiting family members in the hospital when they received bad news. She would cry to console others, weep with those who weep. But nobody, not Grandpa, not her daughter, my mom, nor any of my uncles or Grandma's siblings ever remembered her crying for herself. My grandma was sobbing uncontrollably. Grandpa, a retired steelworker, former Marine sergeant and Korean War combat veteran, physically grabbed Ass Pastor and escorted him out of their house, not too gently. Contrary to everyone's expectations, Grandma lived another 6 months, mostly because of sheer force of will. Eventually, though, Grandma passed away and we held her memorial service at the funeral home, not Big White Church. Pompous Pastor and Ass Pastor were conspicuously absent. In fact, there were no professional Christians from Big White Church at the service at all, not even in the audience. To start the service, Grandpa stood up at the podium in front of the crowd and said, "Some of you may have heard that I disinvited Pompous Pastor and Ass Pastor from this funeral service. This service is not an appropriate place for me to give you my reasons for doing this, although you all know me and so you know that my reasons are good ones. Also, my wife asked me to exclude them. This funeral service may be different from other funerals that you have attended. It is going to be an open microphone funeral. Everyone who wants to say something is invited to come up here and describe your friendship with my wife, Tell a story about her that is worth remembering, or anything else that you want to say that will honor her memory and bring comfort to everyone here today. I have asked several family members to prepare statements, but you don't have to have anything prepared. Please, if you want to say something, come up here and do so. There were about 100 people at the funeral service. At least a third of them eventually stepped up to the microphone. The service, which we had planned to last about 30 minutes, lasted for over 2 hours and, as best I can tell, not one person left early. There was laughing, crying, and hugging. 3 of her grandchildren played some of her favorite songs on the piano and guitar. We all joined hands and sang her favorite hymns. Afterwards, dozens of people told my grandpa that it was one of the most comforting and uplifting funerals they had ever attended. More than a few remarked that funerals are better without preachers anyway, or something similar. Remembering her pastors and her church in her will. The 1-2 punch. A couple of weeks later, it was time to start distributing the bequests in Grandma's will. Although Grandma and Grandpa dearly loved each other, they had separate wills because, she told my mom, that makes it easier for us to respect each other's turf, and because their lawyer had recommended it. Nobody thought that my grandparents were wealthy. They had lived in the same small but charming house in a prosperous, well-maintained suburban neighborhood for the past 50-plus years, and had worked hard and lived modestly. But it was rumored that they had a very nice nest egg. Of course, there is no legal requirement for anyone to attend the reading of the will, or to even have a reading. Modern telecommunications and near-universal literacy have made this quaint custom practically extinct. But the reading of the will was a tradition in our family because it was one of those events that gave our close-knit, extended family an excuse to get together. We never had family reunions. They were too difficult to schedule for our large family. But we got together at birthdays, holidays, funerals, baptisms, etc., so that if you attended several of these, you would see just about every one of your cousins, aunts, uncles, and even great-aunts and uncles who were grandmas and grandpa's siblings and in-laws. With this family tradition in mind, many of our family members' wills often contained very personal bequests of items that had little cash value, but were the departed family members' way of telling their loved ones that they wanted to share a cherished memory with them one last time. As an added incentive to attend, the family rumor mill had been buzzing with speculation, encouraged by Grandpa, that grandmas will contain some surprises. The reading was held in a conference room at a lawyer's office. Unsurprisingly, the attendees included my mom, as well as aunts, uncles, great-aunts, great-uncles, and many of the grandchildren. We were all surprised, however, to see pompous pastor and ass pastor from Big White Church. They informed us that Grandma's lawyer had told them that grandmas will have bequests not only for Big White Church, but also for them personally. Maybe it was just our imagination, but my siblings, cousins, and I couldn't help noticing that these preachers appeared to be actively salivating over their good fortune at Grandma's generosity. Grandma had a large family, so a sizable number of beneficiaries were named in her will. The lawyer's conference room was a bit smaller than an average middle-class living room. Extra chairs had been brought in, every seat was filled, and people were standing in every remaining space. There was barely space for all of us. Grandma's lawyer suggested that pompous pastor and ass pastor sit in chairs which were in the front of the room, next to himself. Since there was a large table in the room, this meant that the lawyer and these 2 preachers were the only ones who were directly facing everyone else. Although the preachers were gratified to be physically next to the center of attention, they did not notice, as all of the rest of us quickly noticed, that these seats made it easy for everyone else in the room to watch them closely, and practically impossible for them to leave the packed to more than overflowing room before the entire meeting was over, because they were farthest from the room's single door. And there were almost 24 people standing or sitting between them and their only path to escape. The bequests were quite generous, but pretty much what we had expected. Grandpa kept their house, its contents, their retirement accounts, and everything that remained after all of the bequests had been satisfied. Children, grandchildren, and several local charities received nice, but not extravagant, amounts of money. Several sentimental items were named and given to various friends and relatives. Grandpa was first beneficiary listed in the will, but after him, All of the other bequests were arranged in order of increasing worth. They started with sentimental items, which had very small cash value. Then each grandchild received several $1,000s. Then each son, daughter, brother, sister, niece, and nephew received a little more. Then several local nonprofits received very nice amounts, etc. Bequests to Big White Church, Pompous Pastor, and Ass Pastor were almost the last ones listed in the will. They listened politely to the other bequests, but with steadily growing anticipation, as they noticed the exponential upward trend in Grandma's largesse. When Grandma's lawyer got to the Big White Church and preacher's part of the will, he said, "This is a bit unusual, but before I announce these bequests to Big White Church, Pompous Pastor and Ass Pastor, MS Grandma's name requested that I read the following statement to everyone present." He opened a letter that was written in Grandma's own handwriting. "For the past 10 years, not one person from Big White Church has ever called me, come to visit me, or sent me a note to tell me that they cared about me. Not one minister, not one deacon, not one of the church women, not one of the church members who I worked with for all of those years, loved dearly, and thought were my friends. I worked very hard for you when you needed me, for many, many years. But when I needed you and your church, you all pretended that I didn't exist. I only got one visit, when I was dying, and I invited Pompous Pastor to come to my house and help me plan my funeral. This was my last attempt, after many attempts that I had made over the past 10 years, to reach out to my church and pastor, whom I still loved dearly even though they had made it clear that they did not love me. If only I could have my funeral at my church, maybe some of my church friends, whom I had not seen in a decade, would come to the service to see me one last time. And I know they love to hear Pompous Pastor preach, so if he preached at my funeral, maybe they would come to my funeral to hear him, even if they would not have come to see me. But Pompous Pastor couldn't find the time to visit me, or even call me to tell me whether or not he was willing to preach at my funeral. Ass Pastor came by my house, but he didn't want to talk about my funeral. He just wanted me to remember his church in my will. That's all. Just remember his church in my will. It was then that I realized that I had allowed my church to break my heart for one last time. But that was the last time. The very last time. Ass Pastor did not know it when he visited me, but Grandpa and I had already prepared my will long before his visit, which did include a double tithe, 20% of my entire estate, for what was now my former church, Big White Church. This amount was named the amount, an enormous shitload of money, generating muffled wows from many of her heirs, including me. But I got to feeling badly that we had not personally remembered such nice people as Pompous Pastor and Ass Pastor. So I changed my will to include them by name. While I was at it, I changed the amount of money that I left to Big White Church to match all of the love that they have showed to me during the last 10 years of my life, when I was suffering and lonely and no longer able to work my ass off for them for free, like I had done for almost half a century. That is her entire written statement, the lawyer said. Now, let's get back to the bequests in the will. Bequest to Ass Pastor, 1 cent. Bequest to Pompous Pastor, 1 cent. Bequest to Big White Church, 1 cent. The Pompous Pastor and Ass Pastor sat there looking like someone had just injected a gallon of Novocaine into their jaws. Everyone of Grandma's family and friends felt an overwhelming urge to laugh out loud. But we kept quiet because we knew Grandma. We knew she wasn't finished yet. Grandma was simply setting them up for a 1-2 punch. The best was yet to come, and we didn't want to miss it. There is one last bequest, the lawyer continued, for a charity called, which he named, and I'll call Black Charity. Then he paused before naming the amount. Most of us had no idea what Black Charity was. But by the looks on their faces, we could tell that Pompous Pastor and Ass Pastor knew Black Charity very well. Their faces displayed the same expressions of shock, dread, and horror that they would have if the lawyer had said, "This bequest goes to the demonic baby eaters to buy extra large rotisserie barbecue grills and tons of charcoal." Every eye in the room was now fixated on Pompous Pastor and Ass Pastor. The lawyer, who happened to be my uncle, one of Grandma's and Grandpa's sons, let the silence continue a few seconds more. If we had been able to read Pompous Pastor's and Ass Pastor's minds, we would have known the history behind the looks on their faces. Black Charity was sponsored by a large black church just a few miles from Big White Church. They ran a free food/clothing bank, assistance programs for foster children, home delivery of pre-cooked meals for homebound seniors, legal aid, and other social services. A long time ago, Big White Church, which was and still is 100% Caucasian, had provided a few years of financial and other support to Black Charity. Then there was a very bitter, acrimonious breakup, allegedly because Black Charity was practicing the social gospel, while Big White Church was preaching the true gospel. Big White Church even sued to try to get some of their money back, although the suit was eventually settled and very little money actually changed hands. But this being the Deep South, everyone knew the real reason why Big White Church or any white church would stop supporting a black charity. Those N********* were getting uppity and not staying in their place. Grandma and Grandpa had seriously considered leaving Big White Church at that time, but they had reasoned that it was better to stay there and teach tolerance by their words and example. They knew they would never persuade everyone, but maybe they could reach some of the youth at their white church and break the generational cycle of racism. Grandma used to tell us, "My church is my mission field." We did not learn the true depth of her statement until after she died. Since then, Grandma and Grandpa had secretly sent a portion of their tithe to Black Charity every month. Most of Grandma's family, including me, didn't find out about any of this until after the meeting had ended. But Pompous Pastor and Ass Pastor obviously understood what Grandma, by her actions which are more powerful than words, was saying to them. If you had grown up as a white person in the Deep South as Grandma, Grandpa, Pompous Pastor, and Ass Pastor had, you would understand. To many white Southerners, this was one of the most personally insulting things you could do to them. It simultaneously labeled them as racists, condemned their bigotry, and crushed their delusions of white superiority by saying, "These black human beings, whom you hate, disrespect, and have mistreated, are better people than you are. So they deserve my money more than you do." Having allowed time for everyone to observe Pompous Pastor and Ass Pastor while they thought about how their white church had treated this black charity and how they and their church had treated our grandma, the lawyer said, "The amount is..." Then he named the exact same amount that Grandma had named in her handwritten letter, the huge amount of money that would have gone to Big White Church if she had not changed her will. What do you think? Were they the a-hole? Ada for wanting to divorce my postpartum wife? It's stupid to think I'm at this point, but here I am. My soon-to-be ex-wife, 28F, and I, 29M, have wanted kids for years and were thrilled when she finally got pregnant last year. From day one, I wanted to be the most supportive husband and future father I could. Her father was never involved in her life. I used to work as a tech in labor and delivery, and my brother, to put it kindly, is not the most involved father. I saw too many problems up close when it came to lacking husbands, and I would be damned before I made the same mistakes. The problem is roughly 4 weeks into her pregnancy, everything started going downhill. She stopped wanting sex. Fair enough. Hormones and stress make that a problem. I went full stop. But then she didn't want any physical interaction. No cuddling, no kissing, slowly becoming more and more distant. Her eating constantly changed, and she was terrible about it. She would demand I get her something all day, then the moment I give it to her, she wants something else, screaming at me. Okay, again, hormonal issues, I get it, no problem. She never let me to go any appointments, no groups she went to, spent more time away. Became cold and bitter. Constantly angry at me. This went on for months. Slapped me a couple times when I forgot one of her dozens of tasks she assigned me during the day. Stopped doing anything for the house a month into the pregnancy. Sure, she's pregnant, I get it, moving around is hard, but she wouldn't even do laundry about 4 weeks in, and by 5 weeks I did everything. I'm also the primary source of income. I barely sleep. Am running on fumes. Made me sleep in the guest room. Would always try and pick fights. I never once raised my voice, my hand, or my tone. I sat there and constantly mentally reminded myself this isn't her, and this would all be worth it. She didn't want me to make any baby decisions. No name, no work on the nursery, nothing. 1 month before she delivered, she yelled how fucking useless I am and how I don't do anything and that she's staying with her mother. She didn't let me get her anything, come check on her, threatened to divorce me and get a restraining order if I even called her. A couple weeks back, I found out about the birth of my son from a Facebook post. She posted it with her mother and some family. It fucking broke me. I tried to go to the hospital and visit. They had security kick me out. After months of outright hatred, anger, and abuse thrown at me 24/7, I finally had it. Odds are I'm not even on the birth certificate. I open a new account, and all my deposits go there. I took half out of our joint account. She never bought baby stuff ahead of time. Who knows what that money was going towards, so now that she has to buy supplies for her son, she's used up every cent. I've gotten a lawyer. The house is mine. I'm the only one who spent money on it in any way. I've sent the rest of her stuff to her mother's house. I'm demanding a paternity test. I'm not spending another damn cent until I get verification it's my son.
I'm absolutely divorcing here.
She chose the stay-at-home life. If she cheated, she's screwed. Her mother has money for a couple weeks' stay, not even close to enough for full-time support. If he is my son, I will absolutely be getting my rights as a father for a relationship. Last week, my soon-to-be ex called. She was practically hyperventilating. She wanted to come home. She was crying how it was all a mistake. She's not staying with her mother. She's at a friend's house. She wants to come home. She wants our son to have his father. I told her I don't fucking believe he is my son. Why the fuck would she pull this shit if he is? Show me a paternity test, and I'll do everything I can for him, and him only. She wants to meet tomorrow at a park, so I can talk to her. I said sure, so I can finally say everything I should have said months ago to her face. My parents are hoping we can make up, but they absolutely understand if I won't. My brother is a deadbeat jackass, so I don't care what he has to say, but my sister thinks I should at least hear her out. Update Ada, the wanting to divorce my postpartum wife. I had to speed up the process of actually talking to her since the story spread quickly around on the internet, inevitably reaching someone involved with friends or family, and now way more people I personally know are getting the details than I'm comfortable with. Oh well, my bad, lol. Before I ended up chatting with her, I opened up to my parents and sister about what was happening in detail. My parents were flustered at me hiding the more unsavory details, to say the least, and are probably going to be checking up on me daily for the rest of the year to make sure I'm okay. My sister would probably have to be held back from thrashing her, so I had to get a friend to help with the chat since my sister would not be able to contain herself. So basically, within hours of the story going into the digital stratosphere, I called my wife back as quickly as I could to finally sit down and talk. We chose a local park this morning, and I had a friend of mine record the conversation from beginning to end. I was basically ready to hear the generic affair story and get out of Dodge. But of course it got complicated. We met at a section with picnic tables and picked one as far away from other people to avoid them getting wrapped up in any awkwardness. She looked terrible, haggard, stressed, and thankfully without the baby. She tried to have the big emotional chat, and whatnot. I wasn't tearing up or acting like the hardened badass. I frankly was just wanting to figure out what this was all for. I didn't even get to ask the question before the floodgates spilled. I'm going to attempt to relay this story as best as I can because even looking back on the recording it's a mess, but also it's because I don't 100% believe it, so fair warning, it could all be fake. This all started with her mother. As I said before, my wife's father was absent. He started off well, having 2 sons with her mother before Hermel. When her mother got pregnant with her, her father went from being the picture-perfect guy he was at first and slowly changed into a negligent, abusive, unfaithful, and unsupportive jackass, ending with him disappearing when her mother was delivering. He's been in and out of prison since. No one knows why he did it. The impression her mother always gave was a strong, resilient woman who withstood anything life threw at her and did anything for her kids. She has claimed to be in therapy for years. In reality, she has managed to conceal a deep hatred for men outside of her sons, but according to my wife, there was favoritism towards her. My wife also found out she stopped therapy almost a decade ago, but never told anyone. Her mother seemed to always have some slight against me, and now I know why. She was never hostile, but certainly wasn't warm to me, and hearing about her secret hatred, I kinda knew where this was going. Roughly about half a year before she got pregnant, Maya Miles slowly began sowing seeds of doubt and bitterness into my wife. Apparently, she had a full mental break. She told her about me staying late at work, possibly hiding an affair, or that my self-providing majority on the income setting her up for a hard divorce. Everything my Miles husband did to her, she convinced my wife I would do to her, and she pumped this poison into her for months. My wife always idolized her mother, and compounding that with anxiety she suffered from for years, she dove in deep. As soon as she got pregnant, she fell into a mental hole within days. And that's when her mother got hold of her again. Hearing about her pregnancy apparently triggered something fierce in my MIL, and it spiraled from there. She had my wife fully convinced it was happening again. Every single thing my wife did to hurt me was at the behest of my MIL, combined with pregnancy hormones and undiagnosed mental illness she claims to have, no confirmation, and stress. She completely lost her mind. She 100% believed I would bail, so she was punishing me first, culminating in her moving in with her mother and leaving me out of the birth. While I was sending the papers and started the divorce proceedings, she kicked into full-blown postpartum depression. And when her mother finally got her, when she finally beat me, which I guess was her victory over her ex, did I mention she's fucking crazy? She had no more use of my wife. The family involved in the birth included my MIL's sister and my wife's brothers. While my MIL and her sister knew what was going on, my BILs got fed the BS narrative my MIL spun. When my MIL was done with her plan, the entire facade came down, and my BILs found out everything upon questioning my wife. They were horrified. Needless to say, postpartum, facing a very grueling divorce on her side, no longer welcome in our home, and having done everything to alienate me from my son at the behest of a broken lunatic, reality hit her like a truck. She torched her entire life because her mother is a broken shell of a human who used her to enact her own sense of justice. The very mother who washed her hands of her after she got what she wanted. Or, at least this is the story she gave me. Frankly, there are many holes in her story. The starting point of the pattern of abuse, the claims of who was involved in the delivery, me being absent from appointments, the friend who she confirmed is female, she's staying with, and of course, my alleged son's paternity. It seems way too fucking crazy to be made up. Who the hell would go to the effort to make this up facing what she's facing? As soon as she finished, she said she's setting up a paternity test and gave me the info I need. Within luck, it should be done in roughly a week or so once I do my part. She gave the most sincere apologies any human being has ever given. She's begged for another chance. I was frankly too stunned to say anything, so she left and promised to call soon. I don't think I can give her another chance. I don't think I can ever risk anything like this again. God, I'm still hoping she's just being a cheating psycho and spinning a sympathy story to try and throw me off, because this got way too complicated. Final update. Ada for wanting to divorce my postpartum wife. I'm free. Well, this was all a fantastic waste of time. This is full of stupid information that doesn't matter, so here's what happened condensed. It took me way longer than it should have to realize I should actually call someone who saw her behavior when she left firsthand. I called one of her brothers. I basically word vomited and relayed the whole story and asked what they can verify. They could not. What actually happened? She started having an affair with a co-worker roughly 4 months before she got pregnant. He gave her the AP spiel about how he was better and she should go with him when she got pregnant. She immediately gets it in her head to abuse me. Usual affair crap. Eventually wanting to run off with him. The day she left, she did stay at her mother's, but had all the intention to move in with him after giving birth. Before she delivers, she owns up and tells her family everything. My MIL and Bills couldn't care at the time. They may not be crazy, but they still didn't like me, and from what she was selling to them about her AP, they liked him. AP was at the birth, high, and tried to start a fight with them. By then, wife already did a paternity test, and it was his. AP then disappears, and she realizes she's fucked. We have a solid prenuptial, and my house is premarital, plus we live in an at-fault state. Around that time is when I called her out and split finances.
She was deep in a hole with no way out.
And in her mind, pitching a drama show about her family to me made sense to get me on her side. What was the plan for my paternity test? I don't know. What was she planning for whenever I interacted with family again? I don't know. Why did her family go along with it? I don't know. How is she ever going to make up for abuse? I don't know. Is there any truth to her tale about her mother? I have no idea. I don't care at this point. This whole problem was a desperate person and her toxic family gambling everything on a no-show, and only when they had burned all bridges with me did they try and reconnect. I'm glad I called the brother, who had any decency, to own up to their nonsense. He realized how in deep he was and that his sister didn't help with that, and he's finally done with his family's crap and wants to get away. He gave me a copy of the paternity test she gave to him. He sent dozens of messages she had with him and the family in a group chat. I have enough proof for my lawyer to bury her. I texted her and told her I knew everything. She's been messaging me relentlessly with the most vile things she can say. I'm just forwarding it all to my lawyer. I'm still in awe to how she tried to pull a last resort manipulation tactic with the story about her family. It's actually kind of disturbing. But that doesn't really concern me now. Locks are changed. Finances are already separated. I'm not on the birth certificate, and my divorce is getting ready to start. Probably will have no updates for a long time. Divorces take way longer than Reddit makes it seem like. In any way, this was the best case scenario, and am actually giddy that I have a clean break. Huge sigh of relief. She could have at least told me the truth and spared the pointless drama update LOL. And here's the next story. Build a driveway across someone else's property without permission?
Pay the price.
Not sure if this is pro enough, but here goes. I was visiting my friend at his dad's house in an area where the land is so steep all the driveways have to switch back up from the main road to the houses. A straight driveway is not an option because it would be steeper than the building code allows. A few doors down the road, there lived a nice old couple who until recently had had a vacant lot next door to them, but the lot had sold, and the new owner had started construction on a new house. Unfortunately, the lot was so steep that the new owner built his driveway partly on the old couple's land. It was carved out of the hillside with an excavator. This probably wouldn't have been a big deal if the new owner had approached the old couple first and asked nicely, but did he? Would I be telling this story if he had? In fact, the old couple had no idea what was happening until they came home one day to see a huge scar in the hillside snaking up from the road in front of their house, across the corner of their property, and winding upwards to where an excavator was working to prepare the land for their new neighbor's house. They were pretty upset, but being nice, reasonable people, they figured it was an honest mistake, so they went over to talk to the machine operator. He didn't know anything useful, but he was happy to give them the phone number of the new property owner. The old guy gave him a call and politely explained the situation, but his new neighbor, whom he'd never even met, was having none of it. He flat out denied that the driveway crossed the property line, and he was rude enough that the old guy was pretty upset. At this point, the old couple weren't sure what to do. They double-checked the property pins to make sure they were right, and of course they were, but after further conversations with the new owner, it was clear he was an unreasonable guy who wasn't going to come to the negotiating table willingly. The old couple didn't want to take legal action because that would have been expensive and, frankly, the damage to their yard was already done. At the same time, they couldn't just let someone walk all over them like that, especially if they were going to be living next door for the foreseeable future. So the situation stewed for a while as construction continued on the new house, until one day, when my friend's dad saw the old couple in the neighborhood, and they started chatting. Of course, they told him the story about the asshole new neighbor. Now, my friend's dad really likes the old couple who don't have a mean bone in their bodies, so he was pretty pissed about the situation, and when he went home, he couldn't get it out of his head. That evening, after a few beers, he had a brilliant idea. He called up the old couple, explained his plan, and asked for their permission to carry it out. They chuckled and gave him the go-ahead. So he hopped into the rusty old full-size pickup he kept as a second vehicle and drove it over to the old couple's place, where he parked it across the encroaching driveway, making sure it was entirely on their property. The next morning, the work crew arrived bright and early to find that they couldn't drive to the house they were building because some jackass had parked a shitty old F-150 across the driveway. They saw the note in the window with my friend's dad's phone number on it, so they called him to ask WTF. He explained that he had permission from the owners to park there and that, no, he would not move his truck so they could get to work. Furthermore, if anyone attempted to tow the truck, they would be charged with trespassing and theft. There was no way the construction guys were going to haul all their tools up the hill by hand, and they didn't want to get in the middle of a legal battle, so they just called the new owner to let him know they'd be taking the day off, and that they'd continue to take days off until the property boundary dispute was resolved. The new owner called the old couple in a fury, but the old couple told them the same thing my friend's dad told the construction workers. Basically, the vehicle was parked on their own property, so if he had a problem with that, he could go fuck himself. To make an already long story shorter, the new neighbor ranted a while, but eventually he wanted his house to be built, so the nice old couple ended up with a significant sum of money in exchange for an easement, allowing the driveway to pass across the corner of their property, and my friend's dad got several thank you cases of beer and the satisfaction that comes from putting an asshole in his place. Edits. This occurred in a small town in Canada. For those who think I made it up, thanks for thinking I'm so clever, but judging by the number of similar stories in the comments and people asking if this was an X-town, I think this happens pretty often, not too surprising considering the number of houses built each year in the world. Regarding the legal questions and comments, the reason the guy built the driveway where he did was because it was cheaper and easier than making it all on his land, not because there was no other options, so most of your points, if not all, are moot. I'm on mobile, so can't paint a picture, but imagine two lots next to each other on the uphill side of a road with the property boundary perpendicular to the road. The older couple live on the left when you're looking uphill. The new driveway is for the property on the right, and it snakes up the hill in a, roughly, S shape. The bottom 50 feet or so of the driveway crosses the old couple's land to reach the road. I'm not sure if any trees were harmed in the making of this post. The driveway was done by the time I saw it, but the couple didn't make that an issue, so I suspect not. Yes, my friend's dad drove after drinking a few beers. Every hero has his flaw. TLDNR. Neighbor built a driveway across someone else's land without permission and wouldn't compensate them for it, so they parked a truck across it to block access to his land until he would negotiate. What do you think? Were they the a-hole? Can't you just unload around me? So this happened earlier today and was too perfect to not share with you guys. I work in construction as the foreman for a new house build. The location is kind of strange. The house is 250 feet up a hill via a footpath only. All of our materials have to come up this footpath by hand. It's a pain in the ass to manually carry, quite literally, an entire house up this hill. One of our saving graces is having the 2 parking spots on the street at the bottom of this hill marked with official no parking signs. Unfortunately, there is an elementary school about half a block away, and the parents of children seem to regularly, at least twice a day, think it's okay to park in our spots. Now I consider myself a reasonable person, so if someone is parked in the spots and we don't have a delivery or a need to park a truck, I will let it go. If we need the spots and there's someone parked there, however, I will ask them to move nicely, and most of the time they do so immediately. Until today. I get a phone call from the lumber delivery truck that is en route to our location. He says he'll be there in about 2 or 3 minutes. I let him know I will meet him at the street and make sure he has space to park. He's carrying all of the material to frame the roof of our house, which is a lot of really big lumber, and will take easily an hour to bring up the hill. So naturally, I didn't want him parked in the middle of the street with his hazards on for an hour, when we have a perfectly good parking spot for him. As I begin my trip down the hill, I notice there is a school parent sitting in her car idling. Assuming she's just waiting to pick up her child, I walk up to her car and politely let her know that she is parked in a no parking zone and we really need her to clear it to park a delivery truck. She scoffs at me and rudely states back, "I'll just be a few minutes and your truck isn't here. Take a chill pill, dude." Before I can respond, a giant lumber truck comes around the corner, and I wave to him, and then gesture towards him to the woman in the car, who has now put her window back up to ignore me. I put on my best customer service smile and wave at her through the window. She put it down halfway and angrily shouts, "What?" By now the truck has pulled up alongside her car, and I politely ask her again, with a stronger tone of voice, to move her vehicle, reminding her that she is illegally parked in a tow-away zone. Then she gives me this wonderful idea. She says, "Can't you guys just unload around me? Jesus, it's not that hard." I give her another smile and walk away, a brilliant plan forming in my head. I instruct the delivery driver to park as closely to her as possible and block her in with the porta potty that is at one end of our reserved spots and the parked car that is parked just adjacent to our spots on the other end. He smiles because he immediately gets what I'm trying to do and proceeds to expertly block this lady and her car into a little two-parking spot jail. We unstrap the lumber, and my guys begin humping material up the hill. Meanwhile, I call the police parking enforcement to let them know the situation. At this point in time, I wasn't trying to get her in trouble. I just wanted a record of why we were blocking part of the street, so we don't get in trouble with the city. The very friendly traffic officer lets me know that she can be there in about 30 minutes and deal with the situation for me. Wonderful. As we continue to unload lumber, the child of the parent shows up. And wouldn't you know it, Mom is just now realizing that the lumber truck is parked so close she can't get out of her driver door to meet her kid. She awkwardly clambers across the inside of her car and stumbles out the passenger door, shooting glaring looks at me and the truck driver in the process. She loads her kid into the back and then begins to realize that she has no way of leaving. She comes storming up to myself and the driver and states, "I'm in a big hurry. You need to move your damn truck right now so I can go." Before I can respond, the driver gets a grin on his face and says, "Ma'am, in order to unload the lumber on the truck, we had to unstrap it, and per our company policy, I'm not allowed to move the truck with any unsecured load on it." This sends her into near aneurysm levels of blood pressure. Meanwhile, I can barely contain my laughter. "F your policy. I have somewhere to be." She barks back at him. At this point, with impeccably convenient timing, the parking enforcement officer shows up and parks behind the truck. She doesn't see the officer arrive, and while the officer is still getting out of her vehicle, I just casually say, "Can't you just pull out around it? It's not that hard." With the biggest shit-eating grin I've ever had, I watch as she realizes that I just used her line on her. "F you," she yells, and storms back to her car and angrily clambers back in through the passenger door and into the driver's seat. At this point, the officer is walking up to myself and the driver. Before she can even introduce herself, the mom in the car slams it into reverse and stomps on the gas, crashing into our porta potty and knocking it over, and then throws the car into drive and tries to mount the curb and drive on the sidewalk. The officer, driver, and I are staring in disbelief as she gets halfway over the curb and gets stuck. I can hear her screaming obscenities over the idling truck from inside her car. The officer promptly walks up to the door of the car and orders her out. My favorite part of the entire thing is watching her face go to shock as she realized she just did all of that in front of a police officer. She gets slapped in cuffs as the parking officer calls for a second unit, and she is promptly sat on the very curb she tried to drive over. She sits on the curb yelling to the now two officers about how we told her she could stay there and that we never asked her to move. The traffic officer responds that she was the one who was originally called when she first refused to move and that she already knows what's going on. While myself and the driver are giving a report to the second officer, my guys finish moving the remainder of the lumber, and the driver finishes his statement and takes off to go back to the yard. By the end of the ordeal, she was arrested, charged with child endangerment. Her kid was in the back of the car the whole time, reckless driving, destruction of property, the porta potty, and driving on a suspended license. On top of all that, she also got her car towed. The kid went home with his grandma, and she went to spend some quality time in a cell. I never expected her to actually heed my advice to just pull out around it. But I think next time she'll probably think twice about parking in a tow-away zone if she ever gets a license again. TLDR, rude lady parks in construction site reserved parking, asks us to unload around her, so we park blocking her to do so, gets mad when she now has no way out, crashes into our porta potty, and tries to mount the sidewalk. Gets stuck, and arrested by an officer who was on scene, and all with her child in the back seat. Let us know if you think they were in the wrong. AITA for telling my sister she's not allowed to bring her homemade food to Thanksgiving because her cooking is ruining the meal. Every year, our family does a big Thanksgiving dinner, and we all typically bring a dish or two. My sister, who's a lovely person in every other way, insists on cooking something homemade every time.
The issue?
She's not a great cook. And I don't mean just not great. I mean she has somehow managed to turn classic dishes into borderline inedible creations. For context, last Thanksgiving, she showed up with her special recipe, stuffing that was over-seasoned with random spices like cinnamon and cardamom. It was dry, and the flavors were confusing and totally off for stuffing. Only one person took a small bite, and the rest went untouched. Another year, she brought a green bean casserole that had some kind of strange, chewy texture. She later admitted she used coconut milk and almond flour to experiment. No one wanted seconds of that, either. This year, I'm hosting Thanksgiving. Since I'm responsible for putting it all together, I wanted to keep the menu consistent so that people could actually enjoy a cohesive meal. I thought I'd avoid drama by asking her to bring non-food items instead, like wine, soda, or even some flowers. I explained to her very kindly I thought that I just wanted to make things easy and streamlined, and I'd handle the main dishes. But she didn't take it well. She got offended and told me I was being controlling and shutting her out of the family gathering. She then accused me of making her feel inadequate and said that Thanksgiving is about everyone contributing, not me deciding what's acceptable. I told her that everyone appreciates her effort, but that she could contribute in other ways and still be part of it. She doubled down and said she's bringing her famous green bean casserole whether I like it or not. Now, my mom and a couple of other family members have chimed in, saying I should just let her bring whatever she wants because it's Thanksgiving and it's the thought that counts. They're acting like I'm committing some huge offense by wanting the food to be enjoyable for everyone and not have random experimental dishes that no one will eat. But I feel like I'm just trying to keep the meal enjoyable and, frankly, edible. I don't think it's wrong to want guests to actually enjoy the food, especially since I'm putting in a lot of effort to host. Am I really being unreasonable here? Ida? Update. Alright, well, things have escalated fast. Thanks to everyone who offered advice. I tried to compromise, but it's already turning into a whole thing, and Thanksgiving is still a few weeks away. After our last conversation, my sister was being pretty cagey about what she planned to make, so I reached out to my mom, hoping she could help smooth things over. Instead, she got defensive, saying I'm overthinking and that it's just one dish. I told her I wasn't sure it was just one dish anymore, especially after hearing about my sister's grocery haul, including canned oysters and edible glitter. Then my mom let slip that my sister's been hard at work on some creative menu she's planning as her Thanksgiving surprise. Apparently, she's been telling the family group chat, which I wasn't included in, by the way, that I'm being controlling and that she wants to expand everyone's palate with something truly unique. To top it off, my cousin sent me a screenshot from the group chat where my sister said she's bringing not one, but 3 dishes to Thanksgiving now. She's calling them her Thanksgiving Trio Experience, complete with their own place settings and little menu cards she's designing. I'm officially panicking because I have no idea what she's planning to serve, and from what I've heard, it's not remotely traditional. At this point, half the family thinks I'm overreacting, while the other half is texting me with things like, is she really bringing glittered sweet potatoes? I feel stuck. If I try to control it anymore, I'm the bad guy, but if I don't, Thanksgiving might turn into a tasting event for my sister's avant-garde cooking. So yeah, Thanksgiving is weeks away, and it's already become a family spectacle. I don't know whether to brace myself or just preemptively order pizza. Update. AATA for telling my sister she's not allowed to bring her homemade food to Thanksgiving because her cooking is ruining the meal. Alright, so Thanksgiving is now just a little over 2 weeks away, and somehow things have escalated even further than I thought possible. I thought maybe my sister's Thanksgiving Trio Experience would be the peak of the drama. Well, turns out I was wrong. Since the last update, my sister has become fully committed to making her dishes the main attraction. She's been dropping hints in the family group chat, which I'm still not included in, but shout out to my cousin for the screenshots, about how this Thanksgiving will be one to remember and calling it her Thanksgiving debut. She's apparently been referring to herself as the Thanksgiving head chef and has hinted that she's bringing some kind of culinary surprise centerpiece that will transform the whole experience. From what I can piece together, she's planning a main statement dish in addition to her original 3 side dishes. I'm picturing something equally bizarre, but on a much larger scale, and honestly, I'm terrified. If her green bean casserole was already pushing it, I can't even imagine what she thinks is worthy of being the centerpiece. Then, to make things even weirder, my mom texted me privately and suggested that I step back this year and let my sister shine since she's so excited about her contributions. My mom thinks if we just give her this moment, It'll make her happy and she'll get it out of her system. She even hinted that maybe I should focus on decorations and drinks instead of the main dishes, which feels like an attempt to turn hosting over to my sister without actually saying it. So now, I'm left with a choice. Go along with my mom's plan and let my sister essentially hijack Thanksgiving, or keep pushing back and risk a family showdown. I just wanted a nice Thanksgiving with dishes everyone would enjoy, but it seems like I'm either about to hand over the whole meal to her or prepare for some serious drama. Thanksgiving isn't even here yet, and it already feels like a circus. I'm half tempted to just sit back and see what chaos unfolds, but part of me is still worried about subjecting the whole family to whatever artistic statement she has planned. Update: here we are, the day before Thanksgiving, and things have continued to spiral. I decided to let my sister move forward with her trio experience, since pushing back more would only make things worse. I thought we had a plan. She'd bring her dishes, and I'd make sure there were plenty of other options to keep the peace. This morning, my mom let me know that my sister is now adding a surprise dish to her contributions. She's been very secretive about what it is, which has everyone nervous after her past attempts. My mom thinks it's sweet that my sister is putting in so much effort, but a few other family members are not as optimistic. My cousin texted me privately asking if I had backup food ready, and my dad casually mentioned bringing extra rolls, just in case. At this point, I've decided to stick with the plan and let her have her moment. I'll still have a few traditional dishes on hand, so no one goes hungry. Tomorrow will probably be chaotic, but it should at least make for a memorable holiday. Wish me luck. I'll update after Thanksgiving if anything noteworthy happens. Final update: AITA for telling my sister she's not allowed to bring her homemade food to Thanksgiving because her cooking is ruining the meal. Thanksgiving dinner is officially over, and I genuinely don't know where to start. I feel like I just lived through a fever dream of culinary chaos and family drama, and I need a moment to breathe before I can even process everything. My cousin and I are heading out for drinks to dissect all of it because, honestly, what just happened deserves its own Netflix special. I'll post photos later when I get home, but for now, let me try to give you the rundown. So, my sister showed up earlier than expected, which I should have seen coming. She came in like a storm, carrying not just her 3 dishes, but also this giant platter wrapped in foil, which she was clearly trying to make a big deal about. She immediately started rearranging the table, moving my dishes to the side so hers could take center stage. She even brought her own table runner and candles, saying something about setting the mood for a creative dining experience. I decided not to fight her on it because, at this point, I just wanted to get through the night without a blow-up. Her trio experience was, well, let's just say it was everything I feared and more. She started with a glittery sweet potato mash that somehow managed to taste like a mix of sugar and sand. The glitter wasn't even edible glitter. It was craft glitter, which I didn't realize until one of the kids said, "This is crunchy," and I looked closer. Then there was the cranberry and oyster relish. Yes, oysters and cranberries. It looked like someone had spilled jam into clam chowder, and the smell alone was enough to make me lose my appetite. Finally, she brought a pumpkin curry casserole that had raisins in it for some reason, and this weird fishy smell that clung to the air for way too long. But the piece de resistance was her surprise centerpiece dish, which turned out to be a turkey gelatin mold. Yes, she took ground turkey, mixed it with some kind of broth and seasonings, and turned it into a wobbly, translucent mold shaped like a turkey. She even garnished it with parsley and cherry tomatoes to make it festive. I wish I were kidding. The entire table went silent when she unveiled it, except for my cousin, who immediately started coughing to cover up what I'm pretty sure was a laugh. Things hit their peak when my mom, who has been defending her this entire time, took one bite of the gelatin mold and just froze. She didn't say anything, but you could see the regret on her face. My sister, noticing the lack of enthusiasm, decided to go on this long speech about how Thanksgiving food is too boring and how she's trying to challenge our palates. She even called my ham and mashed potatoes uninspired, which was rich coming from someone serving glitter sand potatoes. The breaking point came when my aunt, who's usually the peacekeeper, tried the gelatin mold and actually gagged. She tried to be polite about it, but my sister saw her reaction and completely lost it. She started yelling about how nobody in the family supports her and how we're all stuck in the past with our unoriginal food. She even accused me of sabotaging her dishes by not hyping them up enough to everyone. At this point, half the table was trying not to laugh, and the other half was just staring at their plates, probably wondering how we got here. My sister ended up storming out of the house, but not before saying something along the lines of, "You'll regret not appreciating my vision when I'm famous." She left most of her food behind, which my cousin and I quietly threw out after dinner. The rest of the night actually turned out pretty nice, once the tension was gone. My dad's emergency ham was a lifesaver, and everyone agreed that next year, we're either going to a restaurant or just skipping Thanksgiving altogether. So now I'm sitting here wondering how this even became my life. I'll post photos later because you all need to see the turkey gelatin mold to believe it, but for now, I'm off to grab a drink or three, with my cousin to laugh/cry over everything that went down. This Thanksgiving was truly something else, and I don't know whether to feel relieved it's over or brace myself for whatever fresh chaos my sister has planned for next year. Stay tuned for photos. It's going to be worth it. And here's the next story. AITA for ordering pizza at my friend's wedding because there was no food. Me and my wife were invited to my friend's wedding. The wedding was going to have about 70 ppl, with mostly family. When we got there, we were seated at a table with some other people. Nice people, and we mingled well and had a good time chatting. The wedding was also quite nice. Both my friend and his new wife were very happy. After the ceremony, every table got 2 bottles of wine, bread/butter, and there also was an open bar, so we started to have a few drinks. Then the food came out. It looked really good. The food was set up for buffet. I was half buzzed and looking forward to getting some food in my belly. When it was time to eat, every few tables at a time were going to get called, which is fine. The first few tables that were called were understandably the family of both sides. Then the rest were. The problem was that the family members, his in-laws, are larger people. Now, I don't shame people for how much they eat, but I noticed the helpings of food they had while I was patiently waiting for us to be called. I also noticed that they went for seconds before all the tables were called, and no one stopped them. I didn't say anything, though I thought that was rude. I just assumed that there was just a lot of food. To my surprise, by the time we were called, there was nothing left. I asked if there was more coming out, and apparently that already occurred. So we grabbed the little we could and went back to sit down and ate the scarps. We were all still pretty hungry and a bit pissed off, so we kind of bash-talked that the first few tables ate all the food. Someone mentioned that they could go for some pizza, and then I had the drunken idea of ordering some LOL. So that is what we did. We all pitched in and ordered 4 large pizzas and some chicken wings from a local pizza joint close to the venue, so it didn't take long to be delivered. I met the guy outside and brought the food to our table, and we started to eat. Some of the other tables noticed and asked where the pizza came from. Apparently, some of the other tables close to ours didn't get any food either, so we shared with them. This caused some commotion because other people were looking for and asking the wedding party if there was pizza available. I guess there were others that didn't get to eat either. We did share with anyone who asked us. My friend came to talk to me about why I ordered the food. His bride was not happy about it. It ruined the aesthetics. So I told him that we didn't get to eat and that the food ran out long before our table was called, and we were really hungry. He then asked why we didn't just step out and eat then come back. Though annoyed about that, I respectively explained to him that we were all drinking on an empty stomach and that it probably wasn't the best idea to have drunk people walking around looking for food. I don't think he liked that, but went back to his bride, who was glaring at us. Like, what were we supposed to do? Starve? This wasn't the end, though. As we were finishing eating, one of the in-laws came to our table, and he asked where the pizza came from. This is where I may be the AH. There were 2 slices left. I knew he was eyeing them. I asked the other people at my table if they wanted one. Everyone declined. This guy then said he'd have one. I then took the 2 slices, I put them on my plate and started to eat them, then looked at him and said something like, "No, you and everyone at your tables had way more than your fair share of the buffet, and ate all of it. This is the reason we ordered food in the first place. And now you have the nerve to ask us to share." His face went red, and he returned to his table. There was a lot of discussion going on there. They were all looking back at us with daggers. The bride looked even more ticked off at us. She had a bit of an argument with my friend. He eventually came back to tell us we had to leave. I didn't mean to start any problems, so me and my wife called a cab and left. He called me a few days later, and we had a long talk. I explained my perspective, and he agreed that his in-laws were really rude for eating all the food and leaving most of the other guests with very little. A lot of people actually complained to him about it. Everyone was drinking thinking that there would be food, and they were disappointed. He was upset with his in-laws because he told them how many guests there would be and to order the food for that many people. He also saw how much they were taking but assumed they ordered enough. He was wrong. He brought this up with his wife, and she said that apparently because the in-laws paid for the alcohol and the food they felt entitled to eat what they wanted, she was really mad at them and reamed them out for tainting her special day. He also said a lot of the other non-family guests started to leave soon after we left because they too were hungry. They still had fun celebrating, but it did kind of put a downer on their special day. Out of 70 ppl, about 30 left. I also found out that guy that came to our table was his FIL. FIL was really embarrassed by what I said to him. He felt pretty bad when he found out close to half the guests didn't get to eat anything and left early. So, AITA? Edit. My goodness, I didn't think I was going to get this kind of response, lol. So many comments. I went through a good chunk of the messages and thought that it would be easier to address the common ones here. The only reason I ordered the pizzas was because I was drinking. All I ate that day was a sandwich for lunch and some bread that was at the table, so I needed something more substantial in my stomach so I wouldn't get sick, so no, I couldn't wait it out a few hours. I wasn't the only person drinking either because the open bar was booming. However, I guess I could have held back on drinking a bit until the food came out. Those saying that I fat-shamed the FIL. I'm going to have to disagree. I didn't say anything to him about his body. I was only honest with him about why I had to order the food. I don't judge people based on looks, and accept everyone for who they are, as they are. You can't judge a book by its cover, so I judge people based on their actions. If you knew me, you would see that my friends group ranges from basic people to freaks and weirdos, lol. In fact, a good friend of mine, nicknamed Crusher, is a big dude, absolutely hilarious, and super fun to hang out with. This is not an AI-generated post, lol. My intelligence may be limited, but there is nothing artificial about it. The buffet was at my friend's request. He loves buffets, and this was his added touch to the wedding. He also chose the dishes. I know that it is not common for weddings to do buffets, but that's what he wanted. Thanks everyone for your comments. I will continue to read them and update this thread accordingly. Hey guys! I already have an update. First, I never stated when the wedding happened. The wedding was last week on July 20th. My friend just stopped by for a little bit. Apparently his wife was more upset than he initially said, but not at me, towards her family. He also said she wanted apologies for booting me. So, FIL feels really bad, and he's going to step up and try to fix the situation. He's going to throw an after-wedding shingding, lol his words. Everyone who was at the wedding will be invited, including me, my wife, and some additional people. They are thinking there will be about 100 guests. FIL also promised that there will be an assortment of food, more than enough for everyone plus an army, lol. He also wanted to personally let me know that there will be 50 large pizzas from the same joint I ordered from. That is his way of adding some humor to the situation. I think it's pretty funny, lol. He's also going to hire a DJ or a live band. Possibly have some fireworks and arrange other events like axe throwing and a bonfire. This actually sounds like it's going to be a real fun time. The only difference is that this will be a BYOB event, which is no big deal. FIL is pulling in a favor from a friend of his who owns a farm. The farm has 2 guest houses and the main house, as well as plenty of space outside. About 50 people can be squeezed in between the 3 houses, so he's going to encourage people to bring RVs, I have one, campers, and tents if they can. Nothing is officially yet, but they're looking to hold the shingding around mid-August. Sounds like this is going to be a blast. I'll update you all when I can. And here's the next story. AITA for refusing to cook after my BF tried to critique my cooking with a literal PowerPoint presentation. So, this happened a few days ago, and I'm still trying to process it. For context, I, 28F, have been with my BF, 30M, for about 2 years. We live together, and I've always done most of the cooking because I genuinely enjoy it, and he claims he can't even boil water without setting off the smoke alarm. The other night, I made one of our favorite meals, and while we were eating, he got a weird smirk on his face. He then says, "You know, I've been taking notes." I laughed, thinking he was joking, But then he said, "No, really. I made a presentation." I still thought it was a joke until he got up, connected his laptop to the TV, and opened a PowerPoint titled, "Improving Our Home Dining Experience." I was in disbelief as he went slide by slide critiquing my dishes. Slide 1, too much garlic. Slide 2, pasta consistency. Slide 3, more salt, less sass. The kicker was slide 8, which was just a photo of Gordon Ramsay facepalming with a caption, "What he'd think."
I was stunned.
I told him if he had such detailed opinions, he should cook himself. He tried to backtrack, saying it was all in good fun and that he was just trying to help. But I wasn't laughing. I haven't cooked since, and now he's been living off cereal and takeout. He's sulking, saying I'm overreacting and ruining the joke. So, Reddit, AITA for refusing to cook after my BF presented me with a PowerPoint critique of my cooking? Edit. Thanks for all of your comments and support. I just posted an update. Update, AITA for refusing to cook after my BF tried to critique my cooking with a literal PowerPoint presentation? Not AITA post.
Hey, Hajichi.
So, it's been a wild ride since I posted my original story about my now ex-boyfriend's infamous PowerPoint presentation critiquing my cooking. I can't thank you enough for all the support, laughs, and even the outrage on my behalf. Buckle up, because here's the follow-up you didn't know you needed. After reading your comments and taking some time to process what happened, I decided that our relationship needed a serious talk. I sat him down to discuss how his presentation came across as not just unfunny, but pretty disrespectful. You know, typical mature relationship stuff. Well, what does he do? He smirks and goes, "Oh, I was prepared for this." He actually grabs his laptop, connects it to the TV again, and presents me with another PowerPoint titled, "How to Take a Joke, a Comprehensive Guide." Yes, folks, he made a whole slideshow explaining why I needed to learn how to chill out and appreciate humor. Slide 1 featured a meme of a clown putting on makeup with my name plastered over it. Slide 2, a bullet point list titled, "Why Your Overreaction is Hilarious." Slide 3 was titled, "How I'm Clearly the Comedian in This Relationship." At this point, I was too stunned to speak. But then he pulled out slide 6. Things you can do while not cooking because you're mad. The audacity, right? It was as if he really thought he'd win me over with this next-level presentation. Spoiler alert, he did not. So I did what any rational, PowerPoint-loving person would do. I made my own. I stayed up all night crafting a presentation called "Why It's Time to Move On, a Farewell Guide." It had everything: flowcharts mapping his incompetence in the kitchen, pie charts illustrating my happiness before and after the great presentation debacle, and my personal favorite, slide 9, a gif of Gordon Ramsay yelling, "Get out." This morning, I sat him down and went through my PowerPoint with the same energy he had given me. His reaction was priceless. He started with that same smirk, but lost it somewhere around slide 4, top 10 reasons you're moving out today. By the time I got to the resources for finding your own apartment slide, he was packing a bag. Now, before anyone worries, yes, he did actually leave. And no, I didn't even have to threaten him with slide 12, which was just a photo of me blocking the Wi-Fi router. So, yeah, we broke up, and I'm single, happy, and cooking meals for myself without any critique except my cat's judgmental stare. And to those who said I should make a breakup PowerPoint, just know your wish has been fulfilled. I still can't believe how all of this went down over the course of one single weekend. But I now feel pretty good about myself. Thanks for all of your comments and support. P.S. Oh, and fun fact, some of you were right. He actually is a business consultant, so making PowerPoint presentations is quite literally his day job. I guess he took bringing work home to a whole new, unwelcome level. And here's the next story. Ada for refusing to consider stopping our divorce after my ex admitted her psychic friend lied about me having an affair. I met my wife, Rona, when we were in college together. I made the obviously terrible assumption that the fact she was in post-secondary education meant she had a modicum of common sense. We started dating our senior year and after job hunting settled on moving back to her hometown after graduating. We found an apartment and lived together for 2 years before getting married. All good so far. At our wedding, I met an old friend of hers,
Anna.
She offered to read my palms since she was part gypsy.
Weird.
I am in construction, and I know a few people from that group, and they call themselves Roma. Whatever. Anna only comes to town every once in a while. She lives in NYC, so she doesn't have time to visit since she has an exciting life there. She makes costumes for plays and cosplayers. So we see her maybe 4 times over the next 2 years. Last time she came was Labor Day last year. And that's when it got weird. All of a sudden, Rona starts acting oddly. She starts checking in on me at work, coming by when I'm working late, asking to use my phone because hers is almost out of power. That sort of thing. She finally comes out and accuses me of having an affair. I thought she was joking, so I laugh and say that I am not. This sets her off like a Roman candle, because Anna told her I would laugh it off when Rona came for the truth. I laughed because it was ridiculous. I barely had time for a relationship with my wife and my job. I am home all weekend long. When I go golfing, her brother is almost always either in my foursome or at the club. And most important of all, I love my wife. I wouldn't do anything to harm her. And yet, she takes the word of Anna the psychic seamstress over mine. She asks me to leave our apartment. I say no because I have nowhere else to go. So she leaves and moves back with her parents. They think she is nuts too. I spent the next few months working and trying to convince her that I'm not cheating and that I want her to come home. I don't get invited to Thanksgiving because it would be awkward. I didn't even stick around for Christmas. I went home to see my family. They have been following all this stupidity without commenting until then. At Christmas, they had an intervention. They said my wife was having a break from reality and that she wasn't coming out of it. My dad told me to give my head a shake, which he only does when I am being monumentally stupid. When I got back, I went to a lawyer and started my divorce. That was in January. Finally, at the beginning of April, Rona calls me to talk. I say that we should talk through lawyers. She starts to cry, and I agree to meet her in public if she will allow me to record our conversation, so I can give a copy to my lawyer. She eventually agreed. Turns out her and her parents hired a private detective to find my affair. 6 months, and a huge bill later, 0 evidence of an affair. She finally believes me and wants to come home. I tell her that our lease is up in July, and I already found a job in Denver near my family. She says she would come with me. I respectfully declined. I told her we just weren't right for each other. The truth is, I do not want to have my offspring share DNA with this dingbat. Anyway, I am moving ahead with my divorce. I am gutted that she took her friend's psychic vibrations over mine. Her family has approached me several times. The last time her dad offered to front us a 25% down payment on a house if I agree to go to marriage counseling instead of just leaving. I politely declined. I cannot be bought. Rona is now depressed, but I see no way of ever trusting her again. She is young enough she can marry again and wreck some other guy's life. Ada, and here is the final story. Accidentally burned down my neighbor's fence, and she tries to milk me for $10,000. Judge humbles that ass up real quick. This sub has gotten me through a lot of boredom and has provided me with hours of entertainment. I figure it's my turn to tell my revenge story. So it's been about 4 years since this happened. I was about 18 at the time, working for a security company. There were constant call-offs and no-shows, have no idea why. But being so young and naive, I was constantly working 16-hour shifts and not coming home until 8 a.m. Also, I lived with my father at the time. The time frame of this was around the 4th of July. I finally had a day off and my best friend was back in town for vacation. We decided to get together and chip in on some good old American fireworks. To be fair, I have had nothing but bad experiences with fireworks, so I had no idea how this would be any different. We got home with the fireworks and we laid them all out on the floor. Sparklers, bottle rockets, cakes, and Roman candles. I say, why don't we mess around with some sparklers since it's still not dark yet? Great idea. We go into my backyard, where it hasn't rained in well over 2 months, and it is extremely dry. You see the problem here? One of the little sparkle from mine and my friend's sparkler made contact with the ground and made it two small fires that quickly spread to a large area. I ran as fast as I could to grab the garden hose and quickly started spraying down the fire. It was no use. It was spreading faster than I could spray it. I handed my friend the hose and called 911. What felt like hours was only 4 minutes, and the fire was spreading to the neighbor's fence. The neighbor came outside, and they were fairly calm to grab their hose and spray down the fence, along with the dead grass in her yard. The fire department shows up finally, and I tell my friend, "Only one of us needs to get in trouble. You should leave." He was reluctant to leave because he felt equally responsible, but I convinced him I didn't want him to get in trouble and have to drop out of college. My neighbor was super chill about the entire situation at first. I told her that we could talk about replacing the fence and get some quotes to repair it. She was just super grateful that everyone was okay. About 2 hours after the fire, the arson/fire investigator came to question me about the fire. I told him the truth. I said I was in the backyard by myself playing with fireworks and accidentally lit the ground on fire. I had gotten off that day without being hit by any charges and was commended for being honest. Here is where it goes downhill very fast. About a week later, I get a knock on the door from the neighbor. I opened the door and she handed me 2 pieces of paper for me to look at. There was a quote for the fence valued at around $4,000 and an estimate for lawn care valued around $6,000. These were really shady and just typed out on a Microsoft Word document, no logo or company name. She then adds, "I will also be having you pay my water bill for 3 months because the new yard will need lots of water." Now the fence this woman had before was ragged and falling apart. Her yard, dead grass, weeds everywhere, never mowed it. Now looking at this paper, she wants a mahogany fence and a brand new backyard with flowers and trimmed hedges. I said, "I need to get an estimate myself. This doesn't feel right." She says, "Remember you agreed to replace my fence, and a real man keeps promises." I shut the door and called my dad to tell him about what just happened. He flipped the fuck out and told me, "Son, don't you give that slut a single dime." He gives me the number to his handyman and tells me to take care of it. The next day I had the guy come out for an estimate, and the neighbor ran outside flailing her arms. "I did not give you permission to get an estimate on my fence. Technically, it separates the property line, so it's both of our fences." She calls the cops on me for having a contractor, and they ultimately can't do a single thing because I'm on my property. He quickly finishes the estimate off at $1,200. I also knew a guy who did lawn care from my time working at the grocery store. He estimated the lawn reseeding while she was away from the house to be about $800. After I get these estimates, I give copies to the woman, and she is having none of it. I don't know these people. I don't want them near my house. They're probably really shitty contractors. I said, "No, I know them personally. They are really nice people and do great work." She shut the door in my face, and I went on my way. I ended up working a 16-hour shift that night and got home at 8 a.m., and this woman comes knocking on my door at 9 a.m. and demanded I speak to her. I explained, "I would really love to do this, but I just got home and I have to be back at work in less than 5 hours. I need to sleep." She goes, "What kind of lazy asshat sleeps in until 2 p.m.? At this point, I had about lost it and told her, "You can either accept my $2,000 for my quotes or kiss my ass and get nothing." She stood there for a while with her mouth gaped open, but she accepted my offer and planned to meet down at the notary the next morning. I spent that night after I got off work, writing a contract and gathering the $2,000 in cash. The next morning I wake up and grab this contract to meet down at the notary. I was thrilled to finally be done with this broad and never speak to her again. I waited for her for over 3 hours and she didn't show up. I get a call from her saying, "I'm sorry, the $2,000 isn't enough. I'm having my guys start work on this project and you'll be paying me full price." Oh, really? After that, I did not say a single word to her, and I watched for a few months as these guys turned her backyard into an oasis, complete with a small pond, brand new sod and flowers, the whole 9 yards. Come to find out, she had plans to remodel these things for a long time and was just waiting for the opportunity to go through with it. Also in this time, she used her remodel funds to go on a trip to Hawaii. You know how I found out about this? She was bragging about it on the neighborhood Facebook group and didn't know I was in it. I have a different Facebook name than my real name. Are you ready for the revenge? Now, 4 months after the fire and all the remodels, I get served papers to go to court for $10,300. At 18 years old, I'm having to hire a lawyer to work my case. When we finally do get into court, I lay everything out. The quotes: being harassed multiple times, not showing up after agreeing to a deal, not wanting me to get my own quotes, required by law by the way, and her bragging about screwing me out of money, and I have proof of all of this. The judge looked at her and said, "Ma'am, with all due respect, you're out of your daggum mind. Not only did this young man tell the truth of what happened, he offered to pay you more than he was supposed to. Your lawn was already dead before the fire occurred, therefore he is only responsible for the fence of $1,200. I will also deduct from this his lawyer fees, $800. So, I burned this woman's fence down, and all I'm having to give her is $400?
Cool.
She took a huge financial loss from this. Not sure how much the Hawaii trip cost her, but she was in serious debt. She ended up having to sell the house because of it and moved into a smaller house. Haven't heard anything from her since. TLDR. Burn my neighbor's fence down, sees it as an opportunity to milk an 18-year-old to remodel her backyard and go on a trip to Hawaii. Takes me to court and walks out $9,600 plus in debt. Edit. Some grammar issues. Also, holy hell, I normally dislike people who put in edits like this, but holy hell, it's crazy how this post blew up. I also wanted to clear a few things up. I am not saying that I do not feel bad for burning down my neighbor's fence. I felt really bad about it and wish we could have handled it more civilly. I would have been happy to meet in the middle or get multiple quotes. To this day, I still do not use fireworks because we could have really hurt someone. What I have learned through this, though, is it's best to take responsibility for your actions from the gate. The fire investigator had seen the leftover fireworks near the area of the fire and said he would have slapped cuffs on me and I would be in jail for arson if I would have gave him any other answer. I was not criminally charged, and the incident was deemed an accidental fire. Thank you to the people in the comments giving me information about how much a fence actually costs. I've never had to purchase a fence before, so I had just believed what the contractor had told me without second thought. I will take some time after the edit to address some individual questions. To celebrate how successful this post is done, I have donated $150, $25 for each medal, to the Red Cross Home Fire Relief Fund. If you enjoyed this story, like and follow for more.